At 6:32 a.m. on April 21, 1944, Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell stood beside a P-51 Mustang on the damp tarmac at Debden Airfield, England. His pilot, Lieutenant James Parker, 22 years old, 14 combat missions, 3 confirmed kills, toward the fighter that might not bring him back. Mitchell had spent 7 months keeping Mustangs alive. He knew every rivet, every line, every weakness. The P-51 was the fastest, longest-ranged escort fighter in the world, single-engine, laminar-flow wing, a machine that could chase German interceptors from the Channel to Berlin. But its heart, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, was liquid-cooled, and that was where death hid. The coolant, 17 gallons of ethylene glycol and water, circulated through brass tubes and thin aluminum tanks, from cylinder heads to the header tank, behind the propeller, down exposed lines to a belly radiator. One bullet anywhere in that loop meant overheating within 3 to 7 minutes. 3 to 7 minutes before seizure. 3 to 7 minutes for a pilot to find ground or sky to die in. Doctrine told pilots to stay high, avoid flak, guard the bombers, never dive low. Parker had flown that way 13 times. It hadn't saved anyone. 500 Mustangs had gone down in 6 months, most to fragments and rifle fire, not dogfights. Mitchell had watched them return, trailing white vapor, temperatures spiking past 100 degrees Celsius. Some limped in, most didn't. The manuals blamed tactics. Mitchell blamed physics. He had written up the issue 4 months earlier. The engineering officer said everything met spec. North American built the airframe. Packard built the Merlin. Nothing could change without Wright Field's approval, 4,000 miles away. So Mitchell did what he could. Torqued clamps, pressure-tested tanks, inspected for cracks, prayed. He couldn't armor coolant lines. He couldn't design redundancy. The first man he lost was Second Lieutenant David Chen. March 19, 1944. A Californian like Mitchell, new to the squadron, shot during a strafing pass near Beauvais. A single rifle round clipped his radiator line. The engine temperature rose to 108 degrees Celsius as he crossed the channel, vapor streaming behind him. He saw England. The Merlin seized for miles short. The Mustang flipped and disintegrated. The report called it pilot error. Mitchell knew better. It was design error. The second was First Lieutenant William Morrison, veteran leader, 9 kills. April 7th, over Brunswick. Flak burst 20 feet away. A shard slit the line between header tank and radiator. He stayed with the bombers until they dropped, then turned west. Temperature climbing beyond 110 degrees Celsius. He crash-landed on a Dutch beach, killed instantly. His crew chief, Rodriguez, dug into the records 42 recent losses, 27 due to coolant failures. Doctrine couldn't explain that. Fragility could. By mid-April, Mitchell had watched 11 pilots vanish. He knew every serial number, every face he'd signed off for flight. Every morning smelled of hot metal and sweet glycol, the scent of engines that might not return. At night he checked lines again, searching for a way to defeat inevitability. On April 20th, Parker found him under the lights of the hangar. He asked if anything could protect the system, extra clamps, more shielding, anything. Mitchell told him the truth. The coolant lines ran naked. The radiator hung exposed. No miracle existed. Parker nodded, asked him to double clamp the hoses anyway. Mitchell did, working alone past midnight, hands slick with glycol, tightening steel bands 90 degrees apart. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it might hold a vibration. At 1:15 a.m., he stepped outside into the cold night. Engines murmured somewhere to the Easter AF bombers heading out. In 6 hours Parker would follow. In 7, he'd be over Germany. Parker lifted off at 6:52. 16 Mustangs climbed into morning. Mitchell watched until they vanished, then waited through 4 hours and 37 minutes of silence. At 11:29 the formation returned 15 aircraft. Parker's tail number was missing. Flak hit him over Parkham. Coolant leak. Temperature rising. He stayed with the bombers for 10 minutes, then turned west. The last sight of him was vapor trailing across western Germany. He never came back. That night, Rodriguez counted 6 other P-51s gone that week, 3 pilots dead, 2 missing, 1 injured. He said the system was killing them. Mitchell said they couldn't change it. Regulations ruled, and regulations didn't bleed. The morning after Parker disappeared, Debden felt quieter. The sound of engines warming at dawn still echoed across the airfield, but for Mitchell, every roar sounded like a countdown. He marked Parker's name off the maintenance board, wiped his hands clean, and went back to work on another Mustang bound for Germany. There were always more pilots, more missions, and the same unfixable flaw waiting in every aircraft. That spring, the air war changed. In late April 1944, Major General Doolittle rewrote the rules. Fighter pilots were no longer chained to the bombers. Instead of tight escort formations, Mustangs could range ahead and sweep the sky clear of German fighters. They could dive, hunt, and strike airfields, railways, convoys. It was liberation and a death sentence. The new Chattanooga missions sent them low, where flak and rifles lived, where one hit in the belly meant a race against the clock. Losses climbed immediately. In May alone, 93 P-51s went down 41% from ground fire. The same pattern repeated: white vapor, rising temperature, desperate radio calls. Mechanics like Mitchell and Rodriguez patched new holes every night, knowing it didn't matter. You could tighten clamps, replace lines, flush radiators, but one stray bullet undid it all in seconds. Lieutenant Robert Hayes was the next test of hope. On May 19th, over northeastern France, his flight found a German convoy on a road near Reims. 6 trucks, 2 staff cars. Hayes rolled in at 800 yards, his .50 calibers walking fire across the road. A burst of flame, he pulled up, climbing out of range. Then came the hitter metallic crack beneath his left foot. His temperature gauge leaped 10 degrees. He called it out. Coolant hit. Within seconds, white mist streamed behind his aircraft. At 4,000 feet, he pointed west for England. The gauge steadied at 106 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees short of death. 180 miles to home, 40 minutes of flight. For 8 minutes it held, then began climbing again. Hayes pushed the nose down, building speed to force more air through the radiator. The temperature wavered, then held burly. 10 miles from Debden, the needle passed 114 degrees Celsius. The engine began to hammer. Steam poured from the cowling. The propeller froze 3 miles short of the runway. Hayes glided in silence and landed. Halfway down the strip, rolling to a stop in a cloud of vapor, he was shaking when he climbed out. 18 minutes separated him from death. Mitchell examined the damage. A single 7.92mm round had pierced the fuselage and nicked the return line a hole the size of a pencil lead. 17 gallons of coolant gone in less than 20 minutes. The engine's cylinder heads were cracked, valve seats warped, pistons scored beyond repair. Another Merlin dead, another pilot saved by luck alone. Rodriguez counted 14 similar cases in 6 weeks, 14 engines destroyed, 8 pilots dead, 3 missing, 3 injured. Every conversation ended the same way. "We can't fix it," Mitchell said. "Not without changing the airplane." The P-51's brilliance, its sleek aerodynamics, its belly radiator, its weight-saving design, was the same reason it bled so easily. The Merlin's cooling loop, beautiful on the drawing board, was fatal in combat. Rodriguez compared it to the P-38 Lightning. "2 engines," he said. "If one gets hit, you fly the other home." Mitchell nodded. "Redundancy," he answered. "We've got none." The P-38's radiators were buried inside its twin booms, armored by structure. The P-51s hung in the open wind. Efficiency traded for fragility. Power traded for risk. Then there was the P-47 Thunderbolt, an air-cooled monster that could shrug off the hits that murdered Mustangs. No coolant, no radiator, no lines to lose. Mitchell saw one land with 40 bullet holes in the cowling. 6 had hit the engine itself. The pilot climbed out, lit a cigarette, said the motor never missed a beat. You could blow cylinders off a Thunderbolt and it would still run. You couldn't scratch a Mustang without killing it. By June, even the pilots understood the math. The P-47s took the low-level strafing jobs. The Mustangs stayed high where they belonged. But the orders didn't always follow logic. The war demanded speed, not safety. June 8, 1940, 2 days after D-Day, Lieutenant William Davis of the 354th fighter group attacked a German convoy near Cannes. His first pass destroyed a truck. His second drew a bullet through the belly skin, grazing the coolant return line. He called it out. Coolant hit. Within seconds, the vapor trailed white behind him. The gauge climbed 90, 95, 100, 108. He opened the radiator flap, manually, forcing maximum airflow. It dropped to 106, 60 miles to base, 15 minutes. 10 miles out, temperature passed 116 degrees Celsius. The engine began to hammer. The propeller stopped at 300 feet. Davis glided the last mile, touched down long, and rolled to a dead stop. He climbed out, trembling, steam pouring from the cowling. He was alive. The engine wasn't. Mitchell inspected the wreck the next morning. A hole no bigger than a grain of rice. That's all it took to drain the system in 13 minutes and turn a masterpiece of engineering into scrap. He and Rodriguez didn't even talk while they pulled the ruined Merlin from the airframe. There was nothing left to say. Between April and August 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 569 Mustangs. 41% went down to ground fire during strafing missions. The pattern was the same everywhere. One small hit, one growing plume of white vapor, one fading voice over the radio. Nothing in the manuals could stop it. Then, in late July, someone important came to see. Edgar Schmuther, man who had designed the P-51 itself, arrived at Debden. He walked the line of damaged fighters, tracing the holes, the torn hoses, the empty header tanks. Mitchell showed him everything he'd seen, told him about Parker, Chen, Morrison, Hayes. Davis Schmud listened quietly, asked careful questions, then spoke the truth. Mitchell already knew. It was a compromise, he said. To make it fast, to give it range, we had to keep it light. Armor adds weight. Protection adds drag. The cooling system works perfectly until it doesn't. He admitted they'd counted on pilots staying high, out of reach. Combat hadn't obeyed the blueprint. When Mitchell asked if anything could be done, Schmud shook his head. Not here. Not in the field. Redesigning the cooling system would take months. The war might end before a new model flew. He left the next morning. 3 weeks later, Wright Field sent a technical bulletin. Inspect coolant lines for damage. Double clamp all connections. Reduce power after a hit to delay engine failure. Rodriguez read it, cursed, and tossed it in the trash. They're telling us to be careful, he said. Like that'll stop bullets. Mitchell filed his copy anyway. He kept it with all the other manuals, reminders of a perfect aircraft with one flaw no one could fix. By August 1944, the air war had turned in the Allies' favor. The Luftwaffe was breaking. Its fighter bases bombed daily. Its pilots outnumbered and outflown. But even in victory, the P-51s kept bleeding. For every German aircraft destroyed on the ground, another Mustang fell from the sky trailing a ribbon of white vapor. The numbers told the story no one wanted to write. Between April and August, the 8th Air Force lost nearly 600 P-51s. 2 out of 5 were lost, not to fighters or flak shells exploding nearby, but 2 coolant lines punctured by rifle rounds the size of a finger. The Merlin engine's strength, its power, its efficiency, its altitude performance was chained to the same weakness that killed it. A liquid system with no tolerance for holes. By September, the skies over Germany belonged to the Allies. Mustangs roamed freely, tearing through the remnants of the Luft. They were legends, now sleek, invincible, unstoppable. The press called them the Cadillacs of the sky. No one mentioned that a single bullet could still stop them cold. That month, P-51 pilots destroyed over 400 German aircraft on the ground, but 78 Mustangs didn't return. 51 of them were hit while strafing trains, trucks, and airfields. 51 engines that boiled dry before the pilots could reach home. 51 men whose names went up on squadron boards beside the word missing. Mitchell kept counting. He couldn't stop. Each new loss went into the small notebook he kept folded in his breast pocket. Names, dates, causes. By the fall of 1944, there were 19 entries from his squadron alone. 19 men gone to the same fault, the same coolant lines he had tightened with his own hands. Lieutenant Robert Hayes was one of the few who survived long enough to see the war's end. After his near-fatal flight in May, He went back up 43 more times. He was a quiet, steady pilot, never reckless, never lucky for long. On November 3, 1944, he joined a strafing attack on a rail yard near His third pass ended like too many others. Ground fire struck beneath the belly. Coolant vapor trailed from the scoop. Hayes climbed toward the west, radioed his flight, and watched his temperature rise past 100, then 110, then 115 degrees Celsius. The Merlin seized at 11,000 feet over Holland. Hayes bailed out, broke his ankle on landing, and was rescued by British troops within hours. He never flew combat again. Months later, Allied soldiers found the wreck of his P-51. It had buried itself nose first into a field. The engine block fused solid. The radiator and header tank were bone dry. When the war ended in May 1945, Mitchell was still at Debden. He'd serviced his last Mustang with the same ritual as the first checking clamps. Pressure testing tanks, topping coolant. He'd done everything right, always, and it had never been enough. The P-51 was a triumph of design, a masterpiece that had carried bombers to Berlin and back, but it was also a machine built around a fatal truth. Performance came first, survival second. In the European theater, the combined air forces lost more than 2,000 P-51s in combat. 41% of 8th Air Force losses came from strafing missions that punished the cooling system until it broke. The exact number of pilots killed by coolant failures was never officially recorded, but Mitchell's notebook said 19 too many. After the war, he went home to Los Angeles and opened a garage. He worked on Chevrolets and Buicks, tuned carburetors instead of He didn't talk about the war much. When customers asked, he said he'd been a mechanic in England, nothing more. But sometimes, when the air was thick with oil and heat, he caught the faint, sweet smell of antifreeze and felt his stomach twist. The smell of those mornings at Debden. Robert Hayes went back to Iowa, married his high school sweetheart, became a commercial pilot. Every April 21st, he thought of Parker, the young lieutenant who'd vanished over Germany with steam trailing behind him. Rodriguez stayed in the service, training new mechanics in the jet age. He taught them about redundant systems, sealed lines, and what happened when design forgot about damage. He always ended with the same story. We lost 19 good men because one system had no backup. Decades later, in 1991, a historian piecing together maintenance logs found the same pattern Mitchell and Rodriguez had seen. He tracked Mitchell down, 74 years old, still working part-time at his garage. When asked about the P-51's coolant failures, Mitchell simply nodded. Everyone knew, he said, we just couldn't fix it. The historian's report estimated 500 to 600 P-51s lost to cooling system damage in the war. Hundreds of pilots dead or captured because a single bullet drained 17 gallons of fluid. If they'd built it with redundancy, the historian wrote, many would have lived, but then it wouldn't have been a Mustang. Robert Mitchell died in 2007 at the age of 90. His obituary mentioned his wartime service but not the 19 names he carried with him. The garage still stands, though the sign is new. In the back office, a faded photograph hangs on the wall. A young man in grease-stained coveralls, standing beside a P-51 Mustang. On the back, in pencil, April 1944, England. That's how vulnerability works in war. Greatness and fragility live side by side. The P-51 Mustang was the finest escort fighter ever. Built swift, beautiful, lethal. But one bullet in its cooling system could bring it down. Hundreds of Allied pilots proved it. That's the truth behind the legend, the best fighter in the sky, and the easiest to kill.